The sound came first, a wet slap against bulletproof glass that shouldn't have registered over the thunder, but did. Then the scream. "Hide me." Regan's hand froze mid-gesture, the phone still pressed to his ear, Dimitri's voice crackling through about shipment routes and clean money. But the words dissolved into static because all Regan could process was that sound. That pitch. The frequency of absolute terror that only comes from something small and hunted. His eyes cut left. A child. No, a wraith of a child, skeletal fingers splayed against his window, leaving muddy prints like desperate prayers across the tinted glass. Pink fabric plastered to her body, dark with rain and something else. Her mouth stretched wide, screaming the same two words again and again, voice cracking with each repetition. "Side me, side me, side me." "I've killed men for less than interrupting my dinner," Regan thought coldly, but her eyes, he'd seen those eyes before. Regan's world operated on three principles: control, calculation, and the complete absence of surprises. This was all three principles simultaneously detonating. Behind her, the shadows moved. They emerged from the rain like smoke given form, three figures, maybe four, walking with the unhurried confidence of men who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Even from this distance, Regan could read their body language. Professionals, the kind who cleaned up after themselves. The girl's palm hit the glass again, harder. A smear of red joined the mud. Dimitri's voice buzzed insect-like from the phone. "You still there, Regan?" He should drive away. He should tell Marcus to hit the gas and let whatever street-level tragedy this was play out in his rearview mirror. The iron wall didn't crack for strays. The iron wall didn't crack for anything. But then her eyes found his through the darkened glass. Wide. Wet. Reflecting the amber streetlights in twin points of gold that looked exactly like... No. Regan's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. That was 15 years ago. Different rain. Different child. Different ending that couldn't be changed no matter how many times his subconscious tried to rewrite it at 3 a.m. This wasn't his problem. The girl's knees buckled. She caught herself against the car, fingers clawing down the door panel, and the sound her nails made against the metal was like something dying. Behind her, the shadows were closing the distance. 30 feet. 25. "Boss?" Marcus's voice from the driver's seat, carefully neutral. Not a question. Just an acknowledgement that a decision point had arrived. Regan watched the girl's lips form the words again, though no sound came out this time, just breath fogging the glass between them. "Hide me." Her eyes hadn't left his. They held something worse than fear. They held trust. Blind, irrational, impossible trust that the monster in the black car was somehow less terrifying than whatever was coming up behind her. She'd chosen wrong. She had to know that. His reputation was gospel in 7 languages. The iron wall helped no one. The iron wall was the thing children should run from. 20 feet? His hand moved. It wasn't a decision. Decisions required thought, and thought required the part of his brain that wasn't currently watching a 6-year-old's fingers lose their grip on his door handle. His thumb hit the unlock button with a soft click that was immediately swallowed by thunder. "Open it," he said, voice flat as gunmetal. Marcus's eyes met his in the rearview mirror for one long second. Then the driver's door opened, and Marcus was out in the rain, pulling the rear door wide. The girl fell forward into the car, into Regan's world, and everything changed. Stay with me until the end, because what this mafia boss discovered will shock you. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. 3 hours before the girl in pink became his problem, Regan had been exactly where he belonged. In the shadows, pulling strings attached to men who thought they were free. The penthouse office overlooked a city that paid him tribute in silence. No flags, no monuments, just the steady flow of cash through legitimate fronts and the unspoken understanding that certain neighborhoods existed at his discretion. He'd built an empire on the principle that fear, properly cultivated, was more reliable than loyalty, more profitable than love, infinitely safer than either. Sentiment was weakness, and weakness got you killed. He's asking for more time. Kozlov stood across the desk, 300 pounds of Russian patience wearing thin, says his mother is sick, says the economy pays on time. Regan didn't look up from the contracts he was annotating in red ink. Each mark was precise, surgical. He has until Friday. After that, his mother's medical bills become substantially more complicated. Kozlov nodded and retreated. No argument. No moral debate. That was the beauty of Regan's world. Everyone knew exactly where they stood, and sentiment was a luxury no one could afford. The intercom buzzed. Dmitri on line 2. The union vote. Regan reached for the phone. The union vote would go the way he needed it to go, same as the city council vote last month and the mayoral endorsement before that. Democracy, he'd learned, was just capitalism with extra steps. You simply had to know which buttons to press and which pressure points to lean on. You're an artist, Dmitri had once told him, vodka brave. Most men in this life, they're butchers. But you barely need to draw blood. It was true. Regan had refined the business to a science. Violence was expensive, messy, public, prone to generating heat from law enforcement who had their own quarterly quotas to meet. Far better to own the debt collector than kill him. Far smarter to buy the judge than threaten his family. The Iron Wall, they called him. Not because he was impenetrable, though he was, but because he'd systematically removed every human weakness that might serve as a crack. No wife, no children, no mistresses who might develop feelings or loose tongues. No friends, only assets. No home, only secure locations. He existed in a state of perfect, profitable isolation. They're calling you a ghost, his lawyer had mentioned once, attempting something like concern. People are starting to wonder if you're even real. Good, Regan had replied. Fear of the unknown keeps negotiations short. His phone showed 43 unread messages. Each one represented money changing hands, territory being secured, futures being decided by men who would never see his face. He answered them in order of importance, his responses clipped and final. No room for interpretation, no space for hope. At 11:47 p.m., he left the penthouse through the private elevator, Marcus already waiting with the car idling. They had a midnight meeting across town. A formality, really, just showing face to remind certain people that the Iron Wall cast a very long shadow. The rain started as they merged onto the highway, heavy, biblical, the kind that turned the city into a noir film and made men philosophical about their choices. Regan felt nothing. Philosophy was for people who hadn't yet learned that feelings were just evolution's way of getting you killed. He checked his watch. Dmitri would call in exactly 8 minutes about the shipment routes. Everything on schedule. Everything under control. Everything perfectly, coldly, exactly as it should be. Until the small hand hit his window. She hit the leather interior like a drowning thing breaking the surface. All elbows and gasping breath and rain-soaked desperation. Water cascaded off her in sheets, pooling instantly on the floor mats that cost more than most people earned in a month. The pink dress left muddy streaks across Regan's charcoal suit as she scrambled past him, pressing herself into the far corner of the seat like she could disappear into the upholstery. Drive. Regan's voice cut through her panicked breathing. Marcus didn't ask questions. The engine purred, and they pulled away from the curb with the kind of smooth acceleration that spoke to German engineering and professional training. Regan turned his head just enough to see them. The shadows that had been chasing her. They'd stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, watching his taillights disappear into the rain. Smart. They knew the car, knew what it meant, knew that following would be the last decision they ever made. But they didn't disperse. They stood there in formation, rain hammering down on their shoulders, and one of them lifted a phone to his ear. Not good. Regan faced forward, then made the mistake of looking at what he'd just pulled into his car. She was tiny, impossibly, devastatingly small. 6 years old, maybe 7. The pink dress, some cheap thing with a torn ruffle at the hem, clung to her like a second skin, the fabric so saturated it had gone nearly transparent. Mud caked her knees and elbows. A scrape ran angry and red across her left cheekbone, still weeping blood that mixed with rainwater to create pale pink trails down her neck. Her chest heaved with sobs. She was trying desperately to swallow, hands pressed over her mouth like she could force silence through sheer will. The contrast was obscene, her small, trembling form against the black leather and chrome of his world. Like someone had dropped a watercolor painting into an oil slick. "You're bleeding on my upholstery," Regan said, because that was easier than acknowledging the way her eyes kept darting to the rear window. tracking the shadows they were leaving behind. She flinched at his voice but didn't speak, just pressed harder into the corner, making herself smaller. One hand gripped the door handle like she might need to throw herself out at any moment. Smart kid. Marcus, Route 7. The longest way back to the financial district. Time to think. Time to decide what particular brand of stupidity he'd just committed. The girl's breathing started to even out, terror giving way to exhaustion. Her eyes, dark, too wide, ringed with the kind of sleeplessness that spoke to days of running, finally left the rear window and found his face. They studied each other in the dim glow of passing streetlights. Her, looking for monsters. Him, seeing a complication wrapped in torn pink cotton. "What's your name?" The question surprised him. He didn't ask names. Names created connections, and connections were leverage someone could use against you. She blinked, swallowed. Her voice came out hoarse, shredded from screaming. "Anna? Anna." He tasted the syllables, found them bitter. "Those men? Who are they?" Her hand tightened on the door handle. "The bad ones. There are a lot of bad ones in this city, Anna. The worst ones." Her eyes filled again, fresh tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "The ones who hurt Mama." Regan's jaw flexed. The iron wall didn't crack. The iron wall didn't feel. But the girl in the pink dress had already made a liar out of him. The call came 7 minutes later, exactly when Regan knew it would. His phone lit up with a number he recognized, not personally, but categorically. Burner. Disposable. The kind of number used by men who preferred their business off the record and their threats plausibly deniable. He let it ring twice before answering. Never on the first ring. That showed eagerness, and eager men died young in his world. "You have something that belongs to us." The voice was rough, cigarette-scarred, carrying the flat accent of South Chicago, not local talent then. "Imports. I have a car, a driver, and a schedule you're interrupting." Regan kept his tone bored. In the corner of his eye, he watched Anna stiffen, her small body going rigid at the sound of the voice bleeding through his speaker. "The girl. Pink dress. You picked her up on Ashland and 23rd 4 minutes ago." So they'd clocked his plates immediately. Professional enough to have spotters, organized enough to have his direct line. This wasn't street-level muscle. This was something with infrastructure. "I pick up a lot of things," Regan said. "Be specific. Don't play games. We know who you are, Mr. Torino." "Wrong name. Sloppy. And we know you're a businessman. This is business. The girl for 50,000 cash, and we forget this unfortunate intersection of interests." Anna's breathing had gone shallow. She was staring at the phone like it might bite her. "You're offering me money," Regan said slowly, "for something I don't have. That's called extortion. I don't respond well to extortion." "Then respond to this. We've got 6 men and 3 vehicles tracking you right now. You're headed north on Lakeshore Drive, black Mercedes S-Class, license plate." Regan ended the call. "Marcus, company. I see them." Marcus's eyes were on the rear view. 2 cars back, black SUV. Another one just merged from the exit ramp. They're boxing. The city blurred past, rain, turning the windows into abstract art. Regan's mind worked through scenarios with the cold efficiency of a machine calculating trajectories. Standard pursuit formation. 1 to follow, 1 to intercept, probably a third waiting ahead to cut off escape routes. Textbook. Almost boring. Except for the trembling child pressed against his door. "They're gonna kill me." Anna's voice was barely audible over the rain hammering the roof. "They killed Mama. They're gonna kill me too." "No one's killing anyone in my car." The words came out harder than he'd intended. "It's terrible for resale value." Her eyes met his, searching for reassurance in a face that had forgotten how to offer it. For a moment, Regan saw himself through her gaze. A man in a black suit with dead eyes and hands that had orchestrated more violence than she could imagine. He was exactly the kind of monster parents warned their children about. But he was her monster now. By choice or by accident, he'd opened that door. "Marcus? Lose them." Losing or losing? Marcus's question was specific. In their world, there was losing someone in traffic, and then there was losing someone permanently. Regan looked at Anna. At the pink dress slowly dripping onto his floor mats, at the scrape on her face that needed cleaning, at the trust she'd placed in the absolute worst person in the city to trust. The SUV behind them accelerated, closing the gap. "Your discretion," Regan said quietly. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. The Mercedes' engine roared, and they plunged deeper into the rain-soaked maze of the city, 3 vehicles in pursuit and a little girl who'd bet her life on a monster's mercy. Marcus lost them in the industrial district where the city's skeleton showed through, abandoned warehouses and streets the GPS hadn't updated in a decade. The kind of neighborhood where security cameras had stopped working years ago, and nobody bothered to fix them. By the time they pulled into the underground garage beneath a building that didn't officially exist in Regan's portfolio, the pursuit vehicles were 3 miles away, circling blocks that led nowhere. The safe house was a 3rd-floor walk-up, Spartan and functional. Gray walls, reinforced door, windows that didn't open, furniture that looked borrowed from a hotel liquidation sale. Regan kept 5 locations like this scattered throughout the city. Sterile holding spaces for witnesses who needed convincing or assets who needed hiding. He'd never imagined using one for this. Anna stood in the center of the main room, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood, looking even smaller in the cold fluorescent lighting. She'd stopped shaking somewhere during the elevator ride, fear finally giving way to exhaustion. Her eyes tracked the space with the wary alertness of a prey animal checking for exits. Bathrooms through there. Regan gestured to the hallway. There should be towels. She didn't move, just stood there in her ruined pink dress, arms wrapped around herself, staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite parse. Not quite fear anymore. Something more complicated. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, and the words felt foreign in his mouth. How many times had he said the exact opposite? How many people had he looked in the eye and explained, with perfect clarity, exactly how much pain was coming their way? "You're scary," Anna whispered. "Yes, but you saved me." "Yes. Why?" That was the question, wasn't it? The one he'd been avoiding since his thumb hit the unlock button. Regan had spent 15 years building a reputation on never doing anything without a calculated return. Every favor had a price. Every mercy was an investment. The iron wall didn't crack for sentiment. But standing in this safe house with a 6-year-old who smelled like rain and fear, he couldn't find the angle. Couldn't see the profit margin. Couldn't calculate the return on pulling a stranger's child into his car while armed men watched. "I don't know," he admitted, and the honesty tasted like failure. Anna studied him for a long moment, then walked slowly toward the bathroom. She paused at the doorway. One small hand on the frame. "My mama says monsters aren't real. She says they're just scared people who forgot how to be good." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Regan alone with that assessment. He moved to the window, staying to the side, watching the street below. Empty. For now. His phone showed 6 missed calls from the burner number and 3 from Dmitri. He ignored them all. The moment he started making calls, he'd have to explain this. Have to justify the unjustifiable. The shower turned on. The old pipes groaned and hissed. Through the thin walls he could hear Anna crying, quiet, controlled sobs that said she'd learned early to cry where no one could hear. Regan's reflection stared back at him from the darkened window. Black suit, cold eyes. A man who'd systematically removed every human weakness until nothing remained but perfect, profitable emptiness. He'd forgotten how to be good 15 years ago. Buried it in the same grave where he'd left his capacity for regret. But the girl in the pink dress didn't know that. She'd looked at the city's most feared predator and seen salvation. And now he had to decide what that made him. The first aid kit sat on the coffee table between them, like evidence at a trial. Anna had emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel 3 sizes too large, her hair hanging in damp tangles around a face that was, beneath the grime, heartbreakingly delicate. Regan had gestured her to the couch and retrieved the kit from its hiding place behind the false panel in the kitchen. Now she sat perfectly still while he cleaned the scrape on her cheek with antiseptic that had to sting. But she didn't flinch, just watched him with those 2 old eyes that had seen things no 6-year-old should see. "Your mother," Regan said, keeping his voice neutral as he applied a butterfly bandage. "What's her name?" "Elena." Anna's voice was steadier now, the warmth and dry clothes doing their work. "Elena Volkov." Regan's hand stopped moving. Volkov. The name hit him like a fist to the chest, dragging up memories he'd locked away in the same mental vault where he kept all his inconvenient ghosts. He sat back slowly, studying Anna's face with new eyes. The dark hair, the shape of her jaw, the way her nose turned up slightly at the tip. Christ. Your father, he said carefully. Mikhail? Anna's face lit up with something that might have been hope, or might have been grief. You knew him? Knew him. Past tense. Because Mikhail Volkov had been dead for 3 years, and Regan had put him in the ground as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger himself. We did business together, Regan said, which was technically true. Mikhail had been his accountant, brilliant with numbers, terrible with loyalty. When the FBI had started circling, when the pressure had mounted and the threats had multiplied, Mikhail had come to Regan asking for protection, asking for help getting his family out of the city before the walls closed in. And Regan had said no, not out of cruelty, out of calculation. Protecting Mikhail would have meant exposing his own operations, would have painted a target on everything he'd built. So he'd made the practical choice, the profitable choice. He'd let Mikhail fend for himself. And when the Bratva had caught up with him in a parking garage on the south side, Regan had attended the funeral with appropriate solemnity and moved on with his life. Business. Nothing personal. He talked about you, Anna said softly, and Regan's chest tightened. Before he died, he said you were the smartest man he ever met. She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller on the couch. He used to bring me to your office sometimes. I was really little. He'd let me play with his calculator while you two talked about boring grown-up stuff. The memory surfaced unbidden, Mikhail with a tiny girl perched on his hip, her small fingers pressing random buttons on the adding machine, delighting in the paper tape that churned out. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. You had a stuffed rabbit, Regan heard himself say. You left him in the break room once. Anna's eyes went wide. Mr. Hops? You remember Mr. Hops? Your father tore the building apart looking for him. I still have him. Her expression crumbled. He's at home, with Mama, in my room, on my bed, right next to the music box Papa gave me before he... She couldn't finish the sentence. Regan felt something crack in his chest, a hairline fracture in the wall he'd spent 15 years building. What music box? It played our song, You Are My Sunshine. Papa said whenever I was scared, I should wind it up and remember that he loved me. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But the bad men took it. When they came to our apartment looking for Mama's book, they broke everything. They took Papa's music box and Mama's wedding ring, and they said if we didn't give them what they wanted, they'd make us disappear like Papa did. The words landed like bullets. They'd make us disappear like Papa did. So they knew. The Reapers knew that Mikhail had been eliminated, knew about the ledger he'd kept as insurance, and now they were using that knowledge to terrorize his widow and child. Anna. Regan's voice came out rougher than intended. Before your father died, did he ever tell your mother to come to me if something happened? Anna nodded slowly. He said if anything bad happened, Mama should find you. He said you were the only one powerful enough to help us. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But Mama said we could never ask you for help. She said you don't help anyone. She said you're the reason Papa died. The truth of it was a knife between his ribs. Elena was right. Regan was the reason Mikhail died, not directly. He hadn't ordered the hit, hadn't pulled the trigger. But his refusal to help had sealed Mikhail's fate just as surely. And Mikhail had known it. Had still told his wife to go to Regan if she needed help. Had still trusted somehow that the man who let him die might protect his family. The men chasing you, Regan said, forcing his voice back to business. They're not random. Anna shook her head. They want Mama's book, the one Papa left her. She hid it really good, but they found out somehow. They came to the shop 3 days ago and they hurt her, and I ran and her voice cracked. Is Mama dead? I don't know. They were hitting her so much. There was so much blood. She told me to run and hide and not come back. She told me to find the biggest monster I could find because only a monster could fight other monsters. Regan's jaw tightened. Find the biggest monster. So Elena had sent her daughter to him after all. Even believing he'd let Mikhail die, she'd known Regan was Anna's best chance. Anna. He waited until she met his eyes. Those men. Did they say what organization they're with? The Reapers. She whispered it like a curse. They kept saying the Reapers were coming for everyone who stole from them. They said Papa stole their secrets, and now they were taking it out of Mama's skin. The Reapers. The splinter group that had been making noise for 6 months, absorbing smaller operations, pushing boundaries, led by a psychopath who called himself the Vulture and believed the old guard had grown soft. Regan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The math was simple and damning. 3 years ago, he'd let Mikhail Volkov die rather than risk his empire. Now Mikhail's daughter sat on his couch, wearing his bandage, trusting his protection. Now Mikhail's wife was either dead or dying because Regan had left them vulnerable. Now the Reapers were hunting a 6-year-old child for leverage in a war Regan should have prevented. The debt had come due after all. Anna, he turned back to face her. I need you to understand something. Your father came to me 3 years ago and asked for help, and I said no. She looked up at him, those dark eyes, Mikhail's eyes, studying his face. I let him die because helping him would have cost me too much. I chose my business over his life. Your mother is right to hate me. You should hate me too. Anna was quiet for a long moment. Then she slid off the couch and walked over to him. She was so small she barely reached his waist. She looked up at him with an expression far too wise for her age. Papa used to say, everybody makes mistakes. He said the important thing is what you do after. Her small hand reached out and took his. You're helping now, she whispered. That's what matters. Regan looked down at their joined hands, hers tiny and trusting, his scarred and stained with 15 years of necessary sins. She was offering him something he didn't deserve, something he'd forgotten even existed. Forgiveness, or maybe just a chance to earn it. I'm going to find your mother, he said quietly, and I'm going to get your music box back. And then I'm going to make sure the Reapers never hurt anyone again. Promise? The word hung in the air between them. Promises were leverage. Promises were weaknesses. The iron wall didn't make promises because promises could be broken, and broken promises created enemies. But looking at Mikhail's daughter, at the child who'd trusted him when she should have run, Regan found himself nodding. I promise. Anna studied him for a long moment, then nodded back, solemn as a contract signing. Okay, she whispered. I believe you. And God help him. Regan was going to make sure she was right. The message arrived at 2:47 a.m. in the form of a video file sent from another burner number. Regan watched it on his phone with the volume low. Anna finally asleep on the couch behind him, her small body curled into a question mark under a blanket he'd retrieved from the closet. The video showed a warehouse he recognized, one of his import staging facilities on the waterfront. The camera panned slowly across the interior, documenting the methodical destruction. Shipping containers split open, their contents scattered and torched, forklifts overturned, the office gutted, filing cabinets dumped and set ablaze. Professional work, expensive work, the kind of message that cost 6 figures to send. Then the camera found the wall. Someone had used spray paint, red as arterial blood, to write in letters 3 feet high, the girl or the city. The video ended with a close-up of a bird skull. A vulture, naturally, placed carefully on top of a shipping manifest with Regan's company name printed across the header. His phone rang immediately after. Same burner prefix as before. You see our proposal? The voice was different this time. Younger, cultured. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd read philosophy and decided violence was art. I see vandalism and trespassing, Regan said. I'm not impressed. You should be. That facility represented what? 4 million in quarterly revenue? Consider it a down payment on your education. Education in what? Reality, Mr. Regan. The name was correct this time. They'd done their homework. You've been playing king for so long you've forgotten what revolution looks like. The old structures are collapsing. The old men are being replaced. You can either adapt or be buried with the rest of the fossils. Philosophical for a thug. I'm not a thug. I'm the Vulture. And I'm offering you a choice. Return the Volkov girl by sunrise, or watch everything you've built turn to ash. Regan glanced back at Anna's sleeping form. She'd curled around the blanket like it was the only solid thing in the universe, one small hand tucked under her chin. Even in sleep, she looked hunted. Why do you want her? Regan asked, though he already knew. The book. Mikhail's ledger. Anna was leveraged to force Elena to give it up, or bait to draw out whoever might be protecting it. That's not your concern. Your concern is that we have 40 men and unlimited patience. We've already hit one of your facilities. By dawn, we'll hit 3 more. By noon, your distribution network will be in flames. By sunset, your lieutenants will be looking for new employers. You're declaring war. No. The vulture's voice carried a smile. I'm offering you peace, 1 child for your empire. That's not war. That's mathematics. Regan's grip tightened on the phone. You want mathematics? Here's an equation for you. That 1 child is the daughter of a man who once told his wife I was worth trusting. And I let him down. I let him die because the math said protecting him wasn't worth the cost. So you understand. I understand that I was wrong. The words surprised him, but they were true. I understand that some debts compound interest, and I understand that if you think I'm going to make the same mistake twice, you've badly miscalculated. The line went silent for a moment. You're willing to lose everything for her? The vulture sounded genuinely curious. For Mikhail Volkov's daughter? The man you abandoned? I'm willing to lose everything to stop being the kind of man who abandons 6-year-olds to psychopaths. How noble, how utterly pointless. The vulture's tone hardened. The Volkov woman tried to buy her daughter's life with a ledger worth millions. We offered her $5,000 for the girl. She said no, so we broke 3 of her ribs and left her bleeding in her shop as a lesson about the cost of defiance. $5,000. The number hit Regan like a physical blow. They'd valued Anna's life at $5,000, less than one of his suits, less than a single meal at the restaurants he frequented, less than the tip he'd left his lawyer last week. You offered a mother $5,000 for her child, Regan said slowly, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. And you're surprised she chose her daughter over your blood money? We were being generous. Street orphans go for less. The casual cruelty of it, the reduction of Anna to a commodity, to a negotiating chip worth less than a used car, ignited something in Regan that he'd thought long dead. Not anger. Anger was hot and impulsive. This was colder. Surgical. The kind of rage that calculated trajectories and planned executions. Here's my counteroffer, Regan said. You have until dawn to leave the city. Take your 40 men, your unlimited patience, and your revolution somewhere else. Because if I see a single reaper after sunrise, I'm going to remind you why the old guard stayed in power for so long. The vulture laughed. Brave words from a man whose world is already burning. The line went dead. Regan stood in the darkness, phone cooling in his hand, doing the calculation the vulture expected him to do. 1 life versus everything he'd built. A stranger's daughter versus 15 years of careful construction. The practical choice. The profitable choice. The iron wall didn't crack for sentiment. Behind him, Anna stirred in her sleep, making a small sound of distress. Her hand clutched at the blanket, fingers curling tight like she was holding on to something that kept trying to slip away. In her dreams, she was probably running again. Probably hiding. Probably watching her mother bleed while strangers put a price tag on her life. $5,000. Regan had made the practical choice once before, 3 years ago, when Mikhail Volkov had stood in his office begging for help. He'd chosen profit over protection, empire over mercy. Mikhail had died in a parking garage with a bullet in his chest, and Regan had slept fine that night. But looking at Anna now, at Mikhail's daughter, wearing Regan's bandage, trusting Regan's protection, he realized the debt hadn't been paid at all. It had only been compounding interest. His phone lit up with another message. A new video. This one showed his restaurant on Madison Street, the windows dark, the vulture's men arranged outside like a firing squad waiting for orders. The city was burning, and Regan had to decide if one small girl was worth the flames. He looked at Anna one more time, thought about the music box playing "You Are My Sunshine" in a room that had been ransacked by men who thought everything had a price. Thought about Mikhail telling Alina that Regan was worth trusting, even after Regan had proven otherwise. Thought about the man he'd been for 15 years versus the man a 6-year-old girl believed he could be. The iron wall didn't crack, but maybe it could bend. Just this once. Regan pulled up his contacts and began making calls. The war had started. And this time he was fighting for something that mattered. Anna woke at dawn with a sharp intake of breath, her body jerking upright like she'd been pulled from drowning. Her eyes went wide and unfocused, scanning the unfamiliar room with the panicked efficiency of someone who'd learned to catalog threats before full consciousness arrived. "You're safe." Regan's voice came from the chair by the window where he'd spent the last 3 hours watching the street and failing to make the calculation that should have been simple. "It's just us." Her breathing slowed. Recognition filtered into her expression, followed immediately by something that looked like embarrassment. "I fell asleep." "You were exhausted." "Mama says I'm not supposed to fall asleep around strangers." She touched the bandage on her cheek self-consciously, wincing. "She says that's how bad things happen." "Your mother is right." Regan stood, moving to the kitchen area. "But you're not with a stranger. You're with me." It was an absurd distinction given that they'd known each other for less than 6 hours, but Anna seemed to accept it. She folded the blanket with careful precision, her small hands smoothing out wrinkles that didn't matter, and Regan recognized the gesture for what it was: the need to impose order on a world that had stopped making sense. "Your bandage needs changing," he said, retrieving the first aid kit. She came to him without hesitation this time, climbing onto the kitchen stool and tilting her face up toward the light. The butterfly bandage had loosened during the night, one corner peeling away to reveal angry red skin beneath. Regan peeled it off slowly, and this time she did flinch. "Sorry," he said, and meant it in a way that surprised him. "It's okay. Mama says medicine hurts because it's fighting the bad stuff." Anna watched his face as he worked, her dark eyes tracking every micro-expression. "You look tired." "I don't sleep much." "Me neither. Not since." She stopped, swallowed. "Not for a while." He dabbed antiseptic on the scrape with a cotton pad, gentler than necessary. Her skin was so pale the bruising around the wound showed purple and yellow, a watercolor painting of violence on a canvas that should have known only playground scuffs and scraped knees. "Your father used to bring you to the office sometimes," Regan said, surprising himself again. The memory surfaced more clearly now. Mikhail with a tiny girl perched on his hip, showing her the adding machine, like it was the most fascinating toy in the world. "You were 3, maybe 4. You had a stuffed rabbit?" Anna's face transformed. "Mr. Hops. You remember Mr. Hops? You left him in the break room once." Mikhail tore the building apart looking for him. "I still have him." A shadow crossed her expression. "He's at home, with my music box, in my special drawer where I keep Papa's things." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I kept one of Papa's ties there too, the blue one with little gold stars. Mama doesn't know. I took it after the funeral because it still smelled like him." The detail hit Regan harder than it should have. A 6-year-old stealing her dead father's tie because it carried his scent, hiding it away like treasure because it was all she had left. "What else is in your special drawer?" he asked softly. Anna's eyes lit up despite the tears threatening at the corners. "My favorite rock from the beach. It's shaped like a heart. And the fairy wings from my birthday party last year. Mama made them out of wire and tissue paper. And my first library card. Mama took me to get it on my 6th birthday, and I picked out 5 books all by myself." "What were the books?" 3 about dolphins, 1 about space, and 1 about a girl who could talk to animals." Her smile faded. "But the bad men broke into our apartment. They tore up all my books looking for Mama's hiding spots. They ripped the fairy wings and stepped on my heart rock and—" Her voice cracked. "I don't know if Mr. Hops is okay. What if they hurt him?" Regan applied a fresh bandage, using the task to steady himself against the wave of fury building in his chest. Not the hot, impulsive kind. The cold, calculated kind. The kind that planned retribution with surgical precision. "Anna," he sat back, meeting her eyes. "I'm going to get Mr. Hops back for you, and your music box, and your father's tie, all of it." "You promise?" "I promise." She studied his face, searching for sincerity. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she reached out and placed her small hand over his. Her palm was warm and slightly sticky, and her fingers barely wrapped halfway around his knuckles. "Mama says promises are like seeds," Anna whispered. "If you plant them and take care of them, they grow into something real. But if you forget about them, they die and turn into lies." The wisdom of it, delivered in a 6-year-old's voice with such earnest gravity, made Regan's chest tighten. "Your mother is a very smart woman." "She is. She knows like a million flowers and what they all mean. Did you know roses aren't just for saying, I love you? Yellow roses mean friendship, and white roses mean new beginnings, and black roses, they're not really black, they're super dark red, they mean farewell. Anna's words tumbled out faster now, the way children did when talking about things that mattered. Mama's favorite is forget-me-nots. She says they're Papa's way of reminding her he's still watching over us. Forget-me-nots, Regan repeated. The name felt heavy with irony. They're tiny and blue and they grow in clusters. Mama plants them every spring in the window boxes. She says as long as they're blooming, Papa isn't really gone. Anna's eyes filled. Do you think the bad men destroyed them too? Regan thought about the video he'd seen. The ransacked shop, the broken glass and trampled flowers, the systematic destruction of everything Elena had built. I think your mother will plant new ones, he said carefully. And I think they'll bloom even more beautiful than before. Anna nodded, then did something unexpected. She slid off the stool and wrapped her arms around Regan's waist, pressing her face against his chest. The hug was fierce and desperate and trusting in a way that made every wall he'd built feel suddenly inadequate. Thank you, she whispered against his shirt, for being the kind of monster Mama told me to find. Regan's hand came up automatically, hovering over her hair before finally settling there with a gentleness that felt foreign. What do you mean? When the bad men came, Mama whispered to me. She said, run fast and find a monster bigger than them. Find the scariest one you can and make him see you. So I ran and ran until I found you. Make him see you. Elena had known, had understood that the only way to pierce Regan's armor was to put her daughter directly in front of him, to force him to see what his choices cost, to make him confront the humanity he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. Your mother is braver than you know, Regan said quietly. I know. Anna pulled back, looking up at him with eyes too old for her face. She's the bravest person ever. That's why I have to be brave too, so she'll be proud when she wakes up. When she wakes up, Regan repeated, making it a certainty, rather than a hope. Anna nodded fiercely. Then she did something that cracked the last remaining piece of Regan's carefully constructed wall. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek, a quick, childish gesture that carried the weight of absolute trust. You're a good monster, she said simply, the best kind. Regan looked down at Mikhail's daughter, at the girl wearing his bandage and trusting his promises, at the child who'd run through hell to find him and somehow decided he was worth believing in. The iron wall didn't crack. But it could bend. It had to bend. Because if he failed her now, if he let her down the way he'd let Mikhail down, there would be no coming back from it. No amount of money or power or carefully constructed isolation would ever fill the hole it would leave. There's something I need to tell you, Regan said, making a decision he knew he couldn't unmake. The reason I didn't help your father 3 years ago, I was afraid. I was afraid of losing everything I'd built. I thought my empire was more important than one man's life. Anna listened without interrupting, her dark eyes never leaving his face. I was wrong, Regan continued, and I've spent 3 years telling myself it was just business, that your father understood the rules. But the truth is, I was a coward. I chose safety over courage, and your father died because of it. But you're not choosing safety now, Anna said quietly. No, I'm not. Because of me? Because of you. And because... He struggled to find the words. Because your father trusted me, and your mother trusted me, and you trusted me, and I'm done being the kind of man who isn't worthy of that trust. Anna was quiet for a long moment. Then she took his hand again, her small fingers lacing through his scarred ones. Papa used to say everybody deserves a second chance to be the person they wish they'd been the first time. Your father was a wise man. He was, and he loved you. Even when he was scared at the end, he told Mama you were the best man he knew. Her grip tightened. I think he'd be happy you're helping us now. Regan's throat tightened. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. They sat there for a while in comfortable silence. A hardened crime boss and a 6-year-old girl who'd somehow found the crack in his armor and slipped through. Outside, dawn was breaking pink and gold over a city that had no idea a war was coming. But inside this safe house, for just a few more moments, there was only quiet understanding between two people, who'd both learned that monsters could choose to be something else, if they were brave enough to try. The breach came at 9:23 a.m., announced by the sound of engines idling in the alley below and the particular quality of silence that preceded violence. Regan was at the window before his conscious mind processed the threat, years of survival instinct moving his body while his brain caught up. 3 vehicles, black SUVs with tinted windows and the kind of aftermarket modifications that said money and intent. The Reapers had found them. Anna, his voice stayed level, betraying none of the calculations already running. We're leaving? Now. She was off the couch instantly, no questions, already learning the rhythm of running. She'd put on the spare clothes he'd retrieved from the emergency supply closet, gray sweatpants rolled at the waist, a black t-shirt that hung to her knees. The pink dress sat folded on the coffee table, too ruined and too recognizable to take. Regan grabbed his phone and the Glock from the lockbox behind the false panel. 2 magazines, 40 rounds total. Not enough if this went the way he thought it would. The apartment door exploded inward as they reached the hallway. Regan shoved Anna behind him, raising the Glock in the same motion, but the first man through was already firing. Suppressed rounds chewing through plaster and drywall, forcing Regan back into the kitchen. He returned fire twice, controlled bursts that bought seconds, not solutions, then grabbed Anna's hand and ran for the service exit. They hit the back stairwell at full sprint, Anna's sneakers slapping concrete while boots thundered above and below. The Reapers had covered both exits, professional, thorough, exactly what Regan would have done. Second floor landing, a door marked maintenance. Regan kicked it open, pulling Anna through into a corridor that smelled like bleach and desperation. Behind them, voices coordinated in tactical shorthand, closing the net. Where are we going? Anna's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. Roof access. Marcus is meeting us. If Marcus had gotten the coded message, if he'd evaded whatever surveillance the Reapers had deployed, if the car was waiting where it should be. Too many ifs. But Regan had built an empire on calculated risks, and right now the calculation was simple. Stay and die. Or run and maybe live. They burst onto the roof into gray morning light and immediate gunfire. Regan pulled Anna down behind an HVAC unit as bullets sparked off metal, the sound sharp and deadly in the open air. Across the gap between buildings, Marcus's Mercedes sat idling in the parking structure, 20 feet away and a lifetime unreachable. Can you jump? Regan asked. Anna looked at the gap, 4 feet of empty air over a 3-story drop, and her face went white. I don't know. Yes or no, Anna? Can you jump? The roof access door banged open behind them. Shouts, movement, the net tightening. Yes, she whispered. Regan fired 3 rounds toward the door, suppressing, buying seconds. Then, he holstered the Glock and scooped Anna up, her small body weightless against his chest, and he ran. 4 steps to the edge. 3, 2. He launched them both into empty air. For one impossible moment they were flying or falling, it amounted to the same thing. Anna's scream lost in the wind, and Regan's entire world narrowed to the trajectory and the landing, and the child in his arms who'd trusted him with this. They hit the parking structure's roof hard, Regan twisting to take the impact, rolling. Anna clutched against his chest like something precious. Pain exploded through his shoulder, but nothing broke. Nothing failed. And then Marcus was there, yanking the rear door open. Go. Regan shoved Anna inside and dove after her as bullets stitched across the Mercedes's armored panels. Marcus didn't wait for the door to close, didn't wait for confirmation, just put his foot down and sent them screaming out of the structure into morning traffic. Behind them, the Reapers poured onto the roof, weapons raised, but already they were too late. The chase was on. Regan buckled Anna's seatbelt with shaking hands, checked his shoulder, bruised, functional, and met Marcus's eyes in the rearview mirror. They're persistent, Marcus observed. They're dead, Regan corrected. They just don't know it yet. The secondary safe house was in Bridgeport, buried in a neighborhood where people knew better than to ask questions, and security cameras had a habit of malfunctioning at convenient times. Regan made 3 calls from the burner phone he kept for exactly this kind of emergency, each conversation clipped and specific. Kozlov, I need you at the Bridgeport location in 30 minutes. Full kit. Dmitri, pull everyone off current operations. This takes priority. Santos, I'm calling in that favor from Atlanta. Yes, now. Anna sat on the bare mattress in the bedroom, knees pulled to her chest, watching him through the doorway with eyes that had seen too much in too few hours. The jump had terrified her. He'd felt it in the way her fingers had dug into his jacket, the way her scream had cut off into silence. But she hadn't cried, hadn't complained, just buckled in and held on while Marcus turned the morning commute into a tactical exercise. The girl had spine. Her father would have been proud. The thought came with its usual companion, guilt he couldn't quite suppress anymore. 27 minutes later, Kozlov arrived first. 300 pounds of Russian pragmatism carrying a duffel bag that clinked with the particular sound of well-maintained weapons. He took one look at Anna and raised an eyebrow at Regan. We're protecting children now? We're settling a debt. Must be some debt. You have no idea. Dmitri came next, leaner and quicker, already reading the tactical situation from Regan's posture alone. The Reapers? They want her. They've hit 2 of our facilities and they're promising more. So we give them her and end this. Regan's look could have frozen vodka. We're not having that conversation. Dmitri's eyes flicked to Anna, then back to Regan, and something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or concern for his boss's sanity. Then what conversation are we having? The one where we explain to the vulture that some things aren't negotiable. Santos was last, compact, precise, carrying himself with the coiled tension of a man who'd spent a decade in force recon before deciding private sector paid better. He'd worked for Regan on 3 separate occasions, each time proving he was worth twice what Regan paid him. Heard you picked up a stray, Santos said, his Louisiana drawl lazy as summer. Also heard the Reapers burned 2 of your warehouses and shot up your restaurant on Madison. They're making a point. What point's that? That they think I'm weak enough to trade a 6-year-old for peace. Santos smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. And we're here to correct that misunderstanding. They gathered around the kitchen table. 4 men who'd orchestrated violence across 3 continents, now planning a rescue operation for a child they'd never met. Regan spread out a hastily printed map of the city, marking locations with a red pen. The Reapers are operating out of the old meatpacking district. 3 warehouses, maybe 40 men, standard criminal infrastructure. Their leader calls himself the Vulture. Former military, smart enough to be dangerous, stupid enough to think threatening me was a good career move. What's the play? Kozlov asked. They want the girl to get to her mother. Elena Volkov is either dead or they're holding her somewhere, probably at their main facility. We find Elena. We eliminate the leverage. No leverage, no reason to keep burning my assets. And the Vulture? Regan's jaw tightened. The Vulture learns what happens when you corner something that bites back. From the bedroom doorway, Anna's small voice cut through the tactical planning. You're gonna save my mama? 4 sets of eyes turned to her. She looked impossibly small standing there in her borrowed clothes, but her chin was up and her eyes were dry. Yes, Regan said. Promise? The word hung in the air. Promises were leverage. Promises were weaknesses. The iron wall didn't make promises because promises could be broken, and broken promises created enemies. But looking at Mikhail's daughter, at the child who'd trusted him when she should have run, Regan found himself nodding. I promise. Anna studied him for a long moment, then nodded back, solemn as a contract signing. Okay, she whispered. I believe you. And God help him, Regan was going to make sure she was right. The Vulture made one final mistake. He came for them. Intelligence arrived at 11 p.m. via Santos's network. The Reapers had tracked them to the estate, Regan's actual home, the property he'd sworn never to compromise by bringing business across its threshold. 40 men, full tactical gear, coming in hard with the kind of firepower that said they weren't planning on taking prisoners. Regan had 30 minutes to prepare, and he used every second. Anna? He knelt in front of her, hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. There's a panic room in the basement. Reinforced steel. Nothing gets through those walls. You're going there now and you're not coming out until I come get you. What if you don't come? Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Then Marcus will, or Kozlov, or Dmitri, but someone will come. What if nobody comes? The question cut deeper than any bullet. Regan thought about lying, about offering false comfort, but Anna deserved better than that. Then you press the red button on the wall panel. It calls the police, the FBI, everyone. You tell them everything, and you make sure the vulture doesn't win. She nodded, and he saw her father in the gesture. That same stubborn courage Mikhail had shown walking into his office 3 years ago, knowing the answer would be no, but asking anyway. "I'm sorry," Regan said quietly. "About your father, about not helping when—" "I know." Anna threw her arms around his neck, pressing her face against his shoulder. "But you're helping now." Then Marcus was pulling her away, guiding her toward the basement stairs, and Regan was left alone with the weight of a promise he had to keep or die trying. The rain started at 11:17, right on schedule, as if God himself wanted the aesthetic right for what was coming. They hit the perimeter at 11:23. Regan watched from the second-floor window as the Reapers advanced through his gardens, professionals moving in coordinated teams, using the landscaping for cover, believing they were hunting a soft target grown comfortable behind walls and money. They were wrong. The first mine went off near the fountain, turning 3 men into screaming casualties. The second followed before their team could react, Santos's placement surgical and devastating. Then the lights cut, plunging the estate into darkness broken only by muzzle flash and lightning. Regan moved through his own home like a ghost, using corridors he'd memorized and sight lines he'd planned for this exact scenario he'd sworn would never happen. The Glock was an extension of his hand, 2 rounds center mass, target down, moving before the body hit the ground. They came through the conservatory, and Kozlov was waiting with an AR-15 and the kind of controlled fury that made men pray in languages they'd forgotten. They breached the study, and Dmitri turned their entry point into a killing funnel. But there were too many. Always too many. Regan took a round through his left side, felt it punch through muscle and exit clean but painful enough to steal his breath. Another grazed his temple, warm blood mixing with rain as he dove behind the grand piano that had cost $50,000 and now served as cover worth every penny. The vulture's voice echoed through the chaos, amplified by some handheld speaker. "This is expensive, Regan. All this for one little girl?" Regan reloaded, his hands slick with rain and blood. His or theirs, it didn't matter anymore. He thought about Anna in the basement, curled in the dark, trusting him. Trusting the monster to be monstrous enough to keep her safe. "Not just any girl," he shouted back, surprising himself with the ferocity in his voice. "My girl." The words hung in the air, true in a way he hadn't planned, hadn't expected, hadn't wanted. But there they were, spoken and binding and worth every drop of blood spilling onto his Persian rugs. Santos appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. Kozlov's hit, Dimitri's pinned. There's at least 15 still active. "Where's the vulture?" "Front entrance. Waiting for you." Of course he was. This had always been personal. A challenge, old guard versus new blood, and the vulture wanted his trophy. Regan checked his magazine. 6 rounds left. "Keep them off the basement," he said. "Whatever happens." Then he walked toward the front entrance, toward the rain and the lightning and the man who'd made the mistake of threatening his family. The vulture stood in the grand foyer, under a chandelier that threw fractured light across rain-soaked marble. He was younger than Regan expected, mid-30s, handsome in a way that probably worked well for recruitment, dressed in tactical black that was more fashion than function. A custom Desert Eagle hung casually in his right hand, pointed at the floor but ready. Theatrical. The Iron Wall himself. The vulture's smile was all teeth. "I expected more security, more preparation." "You got exactly what you deserved." Regan stepped into the foyer, his Glock steady despite the burning in his side. Blood soaked through his shirt, warm and sticky. 6 rounds, had to make them count. Poetic. I like that. The vulture circled slowly, his boots squelching on wet marble. "You know what your problem is, Regan? You're a relic. You built your empire on fear and control, but you forgot that empires fall. They always fall, and the men who cling to them die with them." "Is that what this is? Philosophy?" "This is evolution, the old guard stepping aside for something newer, hungrier." He gestured at the shattered windows, the bullet holes, the bodies of his men scattered across Regan's property. "You should have given me the girl when you had the chance. Would have saved you all this unpleasantness. She's 6 years old. She's leverage, a means to an end. You of all people should understand that. You're the man who let her father die for the same reason, because helping him was inconvenient." The words landed like a physical blow, but Regan didn't flinch. "You're right. I do understand. 3 years ago, I would have made the same calculation, would have seen Anna as a negotiating chip, not a child, would have traded her without hesitation if the math worked out. So why the sudden attack of conscience? Because I've spent 3 years watching that decision compound interest." Regan took a step forward, and despite having the advantage, the vulture instinctively backed up. "Because her father trusted me even after I failed him. Because her mother sent her to me anyway, knowing I was her only chance. Because that 6-year-old girl looked at me and decided I was worth believing in." How touching. The vulture's tone dripped with mockery. The big bad wolf grew a heart. "No." Regan's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. "I remembered I had one. There's a difference." "Well, your heart is about to cost you everything." The vulture raised his desert eagle slightly. "My organization. Your organization?" Regan actually smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "You mean the 40 men you brought here tonight? 23 are dead. 12 are wounded badly enough they'll never work again. The remaining 5 are currently being interrogated by people who make me look merciful." The vulture's confident expression flickered. "Your 3 warehouses?" Regan continued, his tone conversational. "My people hit them 30 minutes ago. Your weapons cache, your money, your records, all of it is either burning or already in my possession. You're bluffing." "Your second-in-command's name is Marcus Cole, not to be confused with my driver. Former Army, dishonorable discharge for black market weapons sales. He's got a wife in Gary, Indiana, and a daughter at Northwestern. I called them both 20 minutes ago to let them know Marcus won't be coming home." The color drained from the vulture's face. "Your accountant keeps books at a storage facility in Oak Park, Unit 247. The combination is your dead mother's birthday. How sentimental. My people are photographing every page as we speak." Regan took another step forward. "Your distribution network runs through 6 restaurants, 2 nightclubs, and a chain of dry cleaners. By sunrise, every single one will be under new management." That's impossible. "You've been here, you've been fighting." "I've been making calls," Regan said simply. "See, that's the difference between us. You think violence is power. I know that power is having enough people loyal to you that violence becomes unnecessary. You brought 40 men to my house. I made 3 phone calls and dismantled everything you built." The vulture raised his desert eagle higher, his hand shaking now. "I can still kill you." "You can. But it won't matter. Your revolution is over. Your organization is gone. And in about 6 hours, every criminal network in this city will know that you tried to leverage a 6-year-old girl against me and failed catastrophically. I offered you a deal. 5,000 for the girl. That's more than she's worth." 5,000? Regan's roar echoed through the foyer. "You offered a mother $5,000 for her child, and you think that makes you a businessman? You're not a revolutionary. You're not even a criminal. You're a thug who got lucky and stupid in equal measure." Regan pulled something from his pocket, Anna's crayon drawing, the one she'd made at the safe house. It was crumpled and blood-stained now, but the image was still clear. A little girl holding hands with a stick figure in a black suit. "Do you see this?" Regan held it up. "This is Anna Volkov, 6 years old, loves dolphins and space and stories about girls who can talk to animals, dreams of being a teacher, keeps her father's tie in a special drawer because it still smells like him. Plants forget-me-nots every spring with her mother because it makes them both feel like her father is still watching over them." He stepped closer, forcing the vulture to look at the drawing. "You beat her mother unconscious in front of her. You ransacked her home and destroyed everything she loved. You put a price on her life like she was livestock, and then you called me. The man you knew had failed her father, and tried to make me complicit in finishing what you started. Business is business." "This isn't business." Regan's voice cracked like thunder. "This is what happens when men like you forget there are lines even monsters don't cross. This is what happens when you mistake cruelty for strength. This is what happens when you threaten the one person who made me remember what I'd stopped being." The vulture's hand was shaking so badly now the desert eagle wavered. You're going to kill me. Yes. That makes you no better than. I know exactly what it makes me. Regan raised his Glock, his hand steady despite the pain radiating through his body. It makes me the monster who keeps other monsters away from little girls in pink dresses. It makes me the man who finally learned that some prices are too high to pay. It makes me someone who might actually deserve the trust a 6-year-old placed in me when she had nowhere else to turn. The vulture fired first, but desperation made him sloppy. The shot went wide, shattering what remained of the chandelier. Regan didn't miss. The shot echoed through the foyer, final and absolute. The vulture crumpled, his desert eagle clattering across the marble, his eyes wide with the belated understanding that he'd picked the wrong war to start. Regan stood there for a moment, breathing hard, the Glock heavy in his hand. Rain hammered the broken windows. Lightning flickered. Somewhere in the house, he could hear Santos coordinating cleanup, Dimitri calling for medical support. But all Regan could think about was the panic room in the basement and the child waiting in the dark, trusting that the monster would come back for her. He holstered the Glock and started walking, each step sending fresh pain through his body. The iron wall had cracks now, deep ones, maybe permanent ones. But Anna was safe, and that was worth every fracture. The panic room door opened with a pneumatic hiss at 3:47 a.m., and Anna launched herself at Regan before he could say a word. She hit him at chest height, her small arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressed against his blood-soaked shirt, and she didn't care about the mess or the smell of gunpowder or the way he swayed on his feet from blood loss and exhaustion. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised." His hand found her hair, steadying himself as much as comforting her. "I keep my promises now." Behind him, Marcus waited with the car keys and a tactical medic who'd already expressed professional concern about Regan's refusal to go to a hospital. The estate was a crime scene, sanitized and staged for the police report that would frame everything as self-defense against home invaders. Kozlov was already in surgery. Dimitri was coordinating with the attorneys. Santos had disappeared into whatever shadows he'd emerged from, his fee already wired and his involvement erased. But none of that mattered as much as the child still holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in a liquid world. "Your mother," Regan said quietly. "We found her." Anna's head snapped up, eyes wide and desperate. "Is she alive? Hurt but alive. She's at St. Catherine's under guard. The Reapers had her at their warehouse. She's asking for you." The sob that escaped Anna was equal parts relief and release. Weeks of terror finally breaking through the brave face she'd maintained. Regan let her cry against his ruined shirt, his hand still in her hair, and didn't tell her to be strong or stop or any of the useless things people said to crying children. He just held on. 20 minutes later, they were in the Mercedes. Anna buckled beside him. Dawn breaking pink and gold over a city that had no idea how close it had come to all-out war. The rain had stopped sometime during the cleanup, leaving everything washed clean and glistening. "Will you visit?" Anna asked suddenly. "At the hospital?" Regan looked at her, at Mikhail's daughter, who'd run into the night and found the worst possible savior and somehow made him better for it. "If you want me to." "I do." She reached over and took his hand, her small fingers lacing through his scarred ones. "Mama will want to meet you. She'll want to say thank you." "Thank you. For what? For finally doing what he should have done 3 years ago? For protecting her daughter, only after letting her husband die?" The math didn't balance. The debt would never be paid. But Anna was looking at him with something that might have been trust or might have been hope, and Regan realized the balance sheet didn't matter anymore. Some debts weren't about numbers. Some debts were about becoming someone worth trusting. "Tell me about Mr. Hops," he said, changing the subject to something safer. Anna's face lit up, and she launched into a detailed explanation of her stuffed rabbit's personality, preferences, and the complex social hierarchy of her other toys. Regan listened, actually listened, and found himself almost smiling as the city rolled past and the sun climbed higher. They reached St. Catherine's just after sunrise. Elena Volkov was in room 347, bruised and bandaged but alive and whole, and already crying before Anna made it through the door. The reunion was private. Regan stayed in the hallway, giving them space, watching through the window as Alina held her daughter and rocked her and whispered things he couldn't hear. But then Alina looked up and saw him standing there. Their eyes met across the distance, and Regan saw it all. The recognition, the understanding, the knowledge of who he was and what he'd done and what he'd failed to do 3 years ago. She mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Regan nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't absolution, but it was a start. He turned to leave, but Anna broke away from her mother and ran to the door, yanking it open. "You're not leaving, are you? You're safe now. You don't need. I need you to stay." Her voice was firm, carrying an authority that had nothing to do with age. "Just for a little while, please?" The iron wall had cracks now, deep ones, maybe permanent. But standing there in a hospital corridor with morning light streaming through the windows and a 6-year-old holding his hand, Regan discovered he didn't want to repair them. "Okay," he said, "just for a little while." Anna beamed and pulled him into the room, toward Elena, toward something that looked almost like family. Elena sat up carefully in her hospital bed, wincing with pain but extending a hand toward Regan. Her face was a roadmap of bruises, her left arm in a cast, but her eyes were clear and measuring. "Mikhail used to say you were the most brilliant man he'd ever met," she said softly. "He also said you were the most terrified." Regan took her hand gently. "Your husband was right on both counts. He told me if anything happened to him, I should bring our family to you. I was too angry to listen." Elena's grip tightened. "But our daughter was smarter than her mother. She found you anyway." "I should have helped him," Regan said. 3 years ago, I should have." "You should have." Elena's interruption was gentle but firm. "And you didn't. And Mikhail died. And I've hated you for 3 years because of it." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unforgiving. "But Anna is alive because of you," Elena continued. "And I'm alive because of you. And Mikhail." Her voice cracked. "Mikhail would say that's what second chances are for, to become the person you should have been the first time." Regan sat down heavily in the chair beside her bed, suddenly aware of how much blood he'd lost, how much energy it had taken to keep standing. Anna climbed onto his lap without asking, curling against him like she'd done it 1,000 times before. "I got your music box back," he said to Anna. "And Mr. Hopp's, and your father's tie. Everything the Reapers took. It's all in the car." Anna's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" He looked at Elena. "Your shop is damaged, but the structure is sound. I've arranged for repairs to begin tomorrow. Full restoration, new inventory, new security system, everything." "I can't afford. Consider it back pay for services Mikhail rendered. He kept my books straight for 5 years. This is his final payment, plus interest." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "There's also a college fund," Regan added, looking down at Anna. "In your name, enough to cover any school you want to attend. Your father would have wanted that." "I want to be a teacher," Anna said immediately. "Like I told you, so I can help kids learn to read. Then you'll be the best teacher there is." Regan felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of tension he'd carried for 3 years finally beginning to unwind. Your father would be proud. They sat together as the morning light grew stronger. A crime boss, a widow, and a little girl who'd somehow stitched together a family from broken pieces. Outside, the city was waking up. Police would ask questions. Reporters would speculate. The underworld would whisper about the night the iron wall finally cracked. Let them whisper. Regan had spent 15 years building an empire on isolation and fear. He'd convinced himself that walls were strength and sentiment was weakness. He'd let good men die because helping them was inconvenient. But a 6-year-old girl in a pink dress had shown him what he'd been too afraid to see, that the strongest walls were the ones you built around people you loved, not around your own heart. "Will you really visit?" Anna asked again, her voice drowsy. "After we go home?" "Every Tuesday," Regan heard himself promise. "Like I used to with your father. We'll have dinner. You can tell me about school. Your mother can tell me about the shop, and I'll..." He paused, uncertain. "I'll try to be the kind of person your father believed I could be." Elena's hand found his shoulder, squeezing gently. "He believed in second chances, Regan. So do I. So does she." Anna had fallen asleep against his chest, her breathing slow and even, finally at peace after days of running in terror. Her small hand clutched the fabric of his ruined shirt, holding on even in sleep. Regan sat there holding Mikhail's daughter, the child he'd saved because he'd failed to save her father. The mathematics of redemption were complicated. But maybe that was the point. Maybe some equations couldn't be solved, only balanced differently. The iron wall hadn't crumbled, but it had transformed into something else. Something with doors and windows and space for people who needed shelter. It wasn't redemption, but it was close enough. The Tuesday dinner had become a ritual. Regan arrived at Elena's flower shop at precisely 6 p.m., parking the Mercedes in the alley where Anna had first slammed into his car. The shop's new sign gleamed in the fading light. Elena's Flowers, Est, 2022. The window boxes overflowed with forget-me-nots, their tiny blue clusters nodding in the breeze. Inside, the space had been transformed. New displays, fresh inventory. But more importantly, customers. Real ones, not the kind who came collecting debts. The neighborhood had changed in 3 months. Word had spread that this shop, this street, this entire district was under the iron wall's personal protection. No one collected here anymore. No one threatened. No one charged insurance. Elena looked up from arranging a bouquet of white roses, new beginnings, and smiled. "You're late." "Traffic," Regan lied. The truth was he'd been sitting in the car for 10 minutes, gathering courage to walk through a door that led somewhere he'd never been before. To something like home. Anna burst from the back room, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, math homework already forgotten. "Regan, guess what happened at school today?" She launched into a breathless explanation of her science project, her words tumbling over each other in the way only excited 6-year-olds managed. Regan listened, really listened, the way he'd learned to do over countless Tuesday dinners. "That's impressive," he said when she paused for breath. "Your father would have loved hearing about that. He always said you had a scientist's brain." Anna's face glowed at the mention of Mikhail. Over 3 months, Regan had made it a practice to keep Mikhail present in conversation, sharing stories, preserving memories, making sure Anna knew her father's legacy wasn't just his death but his life. "Come on," Elena said, untying her apron. "Dinner's upstairs? I made that soup you said reminded you of your grandmother's." They climbed the stairs to the apartment, rebuilt, repainted, transformed from a crime scene into a home. The table was set for 3. A vase of forget-me-nots served as the centerpiece. And there, in a place of honor on the bookshelf, sat Mr. Hops the rabbit and the restored music box. Anna ran to the shelf and wound the music box carefully. "You Are My Sunshine" tinkled through the apartment, tinny and perfect and precious. "Still works," she announced proudly. "Just like you promised." Regan had kept a lot of promises in 3 months. The shop restoration, the college fund, the weekly dinners, the security detail that followed Elena and Anna discreetly but constantly, the complete dismantling of the Reapers organization. But more than that, he'd kept the promise he'd made to himself, to be worthy of the trust a 6-year-old had placed in him. They ate dinner together, the conversation flowing easily now. Elena told him about a regular customer who'd proposed to his girlfriend using one of her bouquets. Anna explained her upcoming school play where she'd been cast as a talking tree. Regan shared carefully edited stories from his week, leaving out the darkness but keeping enough truth that they knew who he was. After dinner, Anna retrieved a piece of paper from her backpack. "I made something for you in art class." It was a new drawing, more sophisticated than the first one. It showed 3 figures now, a woman with flowers, a little girl, and a man in a black suit. They were holding hands in front of a shop with blue flowers in the window boxes. At the bottom, in careful first-grade handwriting, "My family." Regan stared at the drawing, his throat tightening. "Anna, It's okay if you cry," she said seriously. "Mama says crying means your heart is remembering how to feel things." Elena appeared beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "She's not wrong. You don't have to be the iron wall here, Regan. You're allowed to be human." He looked at the drawing again, at this representation of something he'd thought he'd never have. Something he'd thought he didn't deserve. The iron wall didn't crack. It had been dismantled, brick by a 6-year-old girl with a crayon and a heart big enough to forgive monsters. Can I keep this? He asked Dana. That's why I made it for you. She grinned. You have to put it somewhere important, though. Somewhere you'll see it every day. I will, he promised. Right next to the first one you drew. As the evening wound down and the music box played its final notes, Regan looked around the small apartment and realized something profound. He'd spent 15 years building an empire of fear and isolation. He'd convinced himself that power meant standing alone, that strength meant never needing anyone. But sitting at this table with a widow who'd forgiven him and a child who'd saved him, Regan understood that he'd been wrong about everything that mattered. True power wasn't controlling others through fear. True strength wasn't building walls that kept everyone out. True wealth wasn't measured in territory or influence or money. It was measured in Tuesday dinners and crayon drawings and music boxes that played "You Are My Sunshine." It was measured in the trust of a 6-year-old girl who'd looked at a monster and decided he was worth saving. Anna yawned, fighting sleep. Will you be here next Tuesday? Every Tuesday, Regan said, and meant it. Promise? I promise. Later, as he drove home through the city he'd once controlled through fear, Regan thought about Mikhail Volkov, about the man who'd trusted him even knowing he'd be let down, about the father who'd believed in second chances. Thank you, Regan thought, sending the words into whatever darkness Mikhail inhabited now. Thank you for your daughter. Thank you for your wife. Thank you for trusting me one more time, even though I didn't deserve it. The iron wall was gone. In its place stood something more complex, more vulnerable, more human. A guardian, a protector. The kind of monster who kept other monsters away from little girls in pink dresses. It wasn't redemption. But sitting at a dinner table with people who called him family, that was something better. That was home. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that redemption isn't found in perfection. It's found in choosing to become better than you were yesterday, even when the cost is everything you've built. Remember that true strength isn't measured by the walls we build to protect ourselves, but by our willingness to tear those walls down for something or someone that matters more than our own safety.